think our topic today is to upskill, sell more, and I think we'll start with a question that we'll begin with, and it's how much longer can you stand me talking like that? How many of you had a negative thought in your head? A few, right? Looking for the door? The same thing goes for your customer when they have to sit through a pitch from a sales rep that's not prepared, okay? I am Sam Caucci. I'm the founder and CEO of 1Huddle. Today we're talking about training. And to give you some quick background before we jump in, I'm going to try to keep this punchy and action-packed here as we wrap up the conference. We work with companies ranging from ESPN to UEFA to back in the States, we have big brands like Lowe's Hotels, Guardian Life Insurance. We started as a sales platform. And one of the things I learned as we launched was there's a heck of a lot of challenges today with the way that we're upskilling our workforce. And I want to start with kind of like the big question that you all are probably thinking is like, why are we here today talking about workforce? And over the last few days, so much of the conversation has been about technology. So much of the conversation has been, how do we make our premium experience better? Whether that's from a service perspective or a sales perspective. And I'm here to kind of say so much about this experience critically sits in the hands of people, which is obvious. And the workforce today is changing drastically. By 2020, 50% of our workforce will be a millennial. I'm sure everybody here is very tired of hearing the millennial word by now. But this is the first time in history we've had 5 different generations of workers at work at the same time. And when we talk to C-level executives across the globe, we kind of hear 3 big challenges. One is, how do we onboard new hires faster? So whether from a service experience or a sales team, when you do make that hire, how do you get them trained up and running at full speed as fast as possible? Is that fair? Everybody kind of thinks about that when you hire. Second part is, how do we continuously upskill? So throughout the season, throughout our year, as we roll out new products, how do we get everybody on our team knowledgeable in the talking points they need to know, again, as fast as possible? And then the third part is, how do we make sure we retain employees long-term? Which today, more than ever, globally, millennial workers are the most likely to quit. Recent research study from Harvard Business Review even made the claim that 73% of millennials are already looking for a new job within their first 2 years in their first job. So challenges of retention, where, for the last few years, I've talked a lot about training, and I've learned that so much about this isn't just training, it's about engagement. And we're talking a lot about engaging fans here. But how much are we thinking about engaging our workforce to show up every day and perform as close to full speed as they should? As we look even closer to this, C-level executives talk even more so about the fact that there's a major challenge around making sure employees are ready on day one. Nearly 73% of CEOs say their number one challenge globally is when they do make a hire, making sure that employee is ready to perform the job on day one. And I made the comment about millennials. But as we talk about millennials, by 2030, we have 1 out of every 3 employees is going to be this new group called Generation Z, which will be good for millennials because it'll take a little bit of slack off of them. But this Generation Z workforce is drastically different. I sometimes use the example, it's sort of like millennials on steroids to a degree. Less sex, less interactions, less risk are they prone to take on. So not only are they hyper-connected, not only do we have a workforce that's more likely to pick up their phone and text you over calling, everybody's heard that. But I think the thing is, you tie it to sales and you tie it to your workforce still having to sell to people. In the next 20 years, robots might take all of our jobs, but for today, we still have employees that have to talk to people. And at this exact moment, we have a workforce that's coming in and getting ready that just hasn't had as many at-bats. They haven't had as many experiences. They haven't had as many touches as maybe past generations have had when it comes to conversations. And these critical conversations, and this is a great room to use these analogies because we're talking about sports, they just haven't had as much practice. They haven't screwed up enough. And these new realities should change the way you think about skilling up your people, because I would argue, and I'm going to make the point a few times, continuing to do the same stuff maybe we've done over the last 20 years, using the same technologies, it's probably not going to get the same type of lift and impact that we have had in the past. And when we talk about technologies, here's just some quick facts. 91% of all corporate learning globally across all industries are delivered through only one of two means. Either clunky online e-learning platforms. Everybody remember back in college when you had to watch the module and take the quiz? I'm sure some people in this room still have that type of system they have to use. It's great in concept. We have a lot of companies we work with, we encourage them to keep those systems in place, but they aren't the only thing we need to be doing anymore. Again, 91% through e-learning platforms, and it's very highly academic, or through stand and deliver trainers, seminar style. Again, the majority of companies that we talk to spend almost their entire sales training budget annually on a handful of sales trainers in the sports space or in the hospitality space to come in and deliver the same content through a stand and deliver format, which we argue is something that, and I'll make some points here about what are some challenges with that. Because the big question is, how effective are these tools? 87% of what I deliver today, you will forget within 30 days of leaving this seminar. If it's not constantly reinforced, doesn't matter how great the content is, okay? You might only remember one thing. And this is a reality of learning today, being hyper-connected. Microsoft just came out with a case study. They looked at over 500 sales reps across, it was a Canadian workforce, which shouldn't change the case study. Average attention span of a seller inside of a seminar or meeting, 9 seconds. You know what an attention span of a goldfish is? 11. Okay? So here's our bit. Now, it sounds like I'm sharing a lot of startling news, but there is some good news, because I think there's a tremendous opportunity for everybody in this room today and companies across the sports landscape globally if we just pause and think. There's huge opportunity today. Because if we think about using the tools and technology that our workforce already knows, or our workforce is moving towards, there's a lot of talk about esports at this conference, correct? It's a game. Using technology like a game, or using things like competition, things that everybody here in this room understand, or rewards. These types of mechanics can be really powerful to drive the type of engagement we need to get just enough attention to upskill our people a little bit faster. And the example we always come back to are things like games, whether it's Pac-Man or a workforce today that understands how to compete on platforms like EA Sports, or they're playing in traffic chasing Pokemon, right? We have a workforce today that understands how games work. Over 10,000 hours of gameplay an average millennial will have consumed before they're 21 years old, which, as a former strength conditioning coach, I will tell you that 10,000 hour rule is pretty powerful. We do have a workforce today that understands, and not just the game, but the mechanics of games. Because when you look closer at this group, 9 out of 10 sales reps globally, when surveyed, say that they're better than a coworker. Right? That's pretty cool. 8 and 10 say that they classify themselves as highly competitive. And 4 out of 5 say that if given the option, they think that life in a game is more interesting than life in the real world, which is a little crazy. I did play video games growing up. I wouldn't classify myself as a gamer, but there's a pretty popular game that was called NBA Jam. If anybody's familiar, it's a basketball game. And I use the example that when you could play this game and you can dribble down the court, jump up in the air, do a somersault, dunk the basketball, and the basket breaks, and then you go out on the basketball court and you can barely do a layup, like life kind of lets you down. So, there's a lot of power in the understanding of how do we use gaming mechanics to excite people that show up to work every day. Talking about your workforce today, that are, again, the sales folks that are responsible for driving revenue, they say things like they expect technology that impacts them in their daily life to show up when they show up to work. So at a time when an average millennial globally will touch their iPhone within 15 minutes of waking up, when the average touches on a smartphone device number in the 20 to 30 range before noontime, when you talk about the thing that's in your pocket, these are the types of things I think that we have to think about when we show up to work more than ever, when we have a worker that is hyper-connected. And again, all of this is coming from a position of how do we take an employee that shows up to work that's a sales rep or a service rep, whether that's a waiter or a bartender or a ticket taker or somebody in security who's part of delivering that premium experience, maybe in some cases with more touch points than a sales rep does, in all fairness, correct? How do we make sure that when they get approached by a customer, they say and do the right thing the right way at the right time every time? And we talk about, especially in hospitality, companies cannot afford the 1-star review on TripAdvisor. So consistency comes down to how we keep our employees engaged every day. But unfortunately, when I'm talking a lot about technology, unfortunately, a lot of the technology that's showing up might be taking our workforce in the wrong direction. Nearly 30% of the majority of work will disappear within the next 10 years because of things like automation. And this is a very hot topic globally today. Will robots take jobs or will they create jobs? But I'm here to say that especially in sales, we have technology that are replacing daily rote activities, which means that as an opportunity, our sales folks and our service folks have opportunities to do other things with more time. That might be communicating with a customer. But again, are we skilling for those types of things, knowing there are certain activities that are disappearing? A lot of inside sales teams that we work with have had a lot of their email cadences automated completely, which means we don't need to hire salespeople that are necessarily typing emails and spending time on LinkedIn and prospecting as much as they should. But what are you doing in your business with that made up time? Which is going to be a big question today. So when I opened up by saying, why are we here today? And I think this is really the answer. The question is, how do we close a skill gap today for our sellers? Because closing a skill gap means that we have sellers that are spending more time closing deals faster, hopefully closing bigger deal sizes. It means from a service side, they're delivering better experiences consistently, which should bring back repeat business, which should drive word of mouth. And again, I don't think there's any magic bullet to this situation. And I think about when we talk about training in the sports space, we should think about it in terms of the product we sell every day. And so much about the best sales and service reps in the world can learn a lot from one thing about Usain Bolt. There was an interview I saw on him after he won his second gold medal in his second Olympics. And he was interviewed and he talked about how every step in his 100-meter, he can explain to you and break down to you post-race and tell you, on my 5th step, I lost 0.02 of a second. On my 7th step, when I was supposed to rise up, I rose up too fast, I lost 0.1 of a second. He can break down every single step in his process. So I say that as a challenge to all of us in our teams. How well can our folks break down the steps in their process from end to end? Because when we talk about training, that's really all it is. It's being able to do two things. One, understand every step in the process. Two, with critical importance. And second, is about being able to pause and reflect and be able to break down. The best sellers I've ever worked with have been able to get off a phone or walk out of a conversation and say, you know what? I could have done this different. The ability to self-reflect is the height of mastery of any skill. So thinking about self-reflection as we move into this, the topic of this conversation today is how do we connect, motivate, and engage our new workforce? And I did something a little bit different for today when I changed this whole deck up actually on my flight because I wanted to look at it a little bit differently. There are 5 things we're doing wrong today when we think about how we upskill our employees, and it's getting more and more critical that we make a change because these 5 things we're doing wrong we can learn from. And if we learn from them, I would argue that we're going to connect better with employees that we hire, especially in sales and service. We're going to motivate them more consistently day in and day out, and we're going to stay engaged so that they stay with us longer term. So, and again, if you with your permission, I'm going to make this kind of punchy. We're going to go through these. There's these 5 things. The first point I'll make is that sellers today are different. I think we've talked about that a lot already. But if you think about the average employee today that gets hired, if you were to add up the total amount of time that they've sat in a classroom setting like you're sitting and watched somebody stand in front of them and talk at them from grade school, so primary into secondary into college, it numbers over 25,000 hours of talk time. So imagine going through primary, secondary, college, maybe having a lot of college loan debt as a salesperson, then getting hired into your first job in sports and being expected to be able to sell and close a deal in your first 2 weeks. On top of the fact that some of the things we've talked about where, you know what, I know that when I was growing up, I didn't have a cell phone, but I spent a lot of time maybe talking over the phone. Or I would go out after school and I would go out and I would play and I knew I had to be home before the streetlights went on. The average employee you're hiring today has not had that experience. So if you think about the amount of conversation and words I've had with another person before the time I was 22, this generation has been robbed of that experience, which means that the talking at, I'm a very big proponent of training, can't be in training at you. Has to be participatory more than ever today. So when we talk about sellers are different, there's a few things that we need to do. This stat up here, I know for some in the back of the room, 91% of CEOs state that on day one, recent college grads overall do not have the skills to perform the job they've hired them for. And they put the task in the hands of their managers, who oftentimes are probably just the best seller that became a manager and has only been selling for 2 years already. So the number one thing we're doing today as a challenge is we're expecting too much of managers too early. We're not providing them with the right tools in order for them to be successful in upskilling people. I bring back to a lot of what are some things that we can do. We can encourage competition across our sales floor or across our service experience. And you're already doing stuff like this. Companies are already doing employee loyalty programs and employee reward programs. Companies are already you're already doing things in sales where you're using competition to compete on sales. But how many people are competing on different training exercises or different training experiences or the amount of events people are going to? We talk about employee rewards. We know that more than ever, rewards are a major driver for our customer and our fan. So I talk a lot, we spend so much time at conferences like this talking about how we make the fans' experience better. How much are we talking about how we make the workers' experience better, the employees' experience? Because it's that person who, if they're having a bad day, is going to make you have a bad day the next day if they interact with a fan the wrong way at an event. So number one, sellers are different. We have to think about what we can do around making the experience for the employee just as valuable on a daily basis as we are for the fan. Number two, boring and outdated. And I think that one of the things that we're doing from being boring and outdated, it's not just the tools we're using, it's our philosophy. It's the systems that we're deploying every day. If we really understood things like how learning works, we would approach things a little bit differently. Peter Brown wrote a book called Made to Stick, Make It Stick, and I'm just going to read his quote. He said, "The central part of learning is interrupting forgetting." A recent study of a forgetting curve showed 70% of what you learn is forgotten immediately, and the next 30% slowly over time. So I would argue that as we think, what are the things that we can do? As we think about handing out manuals to our team, and we know that the majority of the manuals might be read once and might be thrown aside. As we think about how learning is actually deployed, there's a tremendous amount of research that's showing learning today is completely backwards. So the way that academia teaches learning is the way that corporate America generally carries on. And what that looks like is sit through the lecture, read the chapter, cram for the test, take the test, and then forget most of what you crammed for because you studied at 11 o'clock at night the night before the test. All right? So there's a tremendous amount of research that proves that testing people before they've ever seen the content is one of the most powerful drivers of information. Immersion. If I wanted to learn a new language, what's probably the most powerful way for me to do that? It's probably not just Rosetta Stone. I've bought Rosetta Stone about a dozen times. A dozen times I still don't know how to speak Spanish. I even grew up in a spot in South Florida where everybody around me spoke Spanish. But because it wasn't important to me, because I didn't immerse myself in it completely, it did not stick. So again, this is a great book for folks out there that are most interested. I'm a huge believer that the best sales managers and service managers in the world understand how skill is acquired. How do we properly upskill people? And just the same way an athlete goes out on the pitch and practices, they practice fundamentals, and we break down the steps of that 100-meter dash into every step and get better at it. How much time are we spending on that when we think about sales and service experiences? Number three, hiring too many trainers. We know that most training is not impactful long term. And I think that it might seem like I'm making the same point multiple times. However, when we talk about hiring trainers, outsourcing the culture for our sales force and our service force is very dangerous. It's a dangerous activity. Primarily because the type of content that comes in is a mishmash of maybe what's shared across other vendors. I know that when I've hired trainers in the past, I probably keep about, 20 or 30% of what was delivered, and maybe the other 60 or 70% I put aside. And we can make the argument that that 20 or 30% is really powerful. However, my main point is this: completely investing all of your training dollars on one delivery, like a trainer, or one modality, again, is a very risky proposition, especially at a time today when things like this are true. Geoff Colvin wrote a book called Talent is Overrated, probably one of the most highly researched books when you start to talk about like historical mastery of skills. Practice is designed, it can be designed well, or it can be designed badly. If we were a sports team, we would build out our training calendar. We would look at 52 weeks out of the year, and every single week, you're pretty sure I'm going to have some type of game plan for every practice. You probably already do this with your marketing strategy. Do you do this with your training and development strategy? Week 1, we're going to be focusing on prospecting. Week 2, we're going to be focusing on qualification. Week 3, we're going to focus on software. Week 4, we're going to work on handling a cost objection. Week 5, we're going to work on handling a time objection. Again, hopefully, as I kind of machine fire a bunch of ideas here, I hope we walk away with maybe just one that you can bring back to your business. But game planning and scheduling out your training calendar is one of the most simple, powerful things that you can do right away, because it starts you down a track of things you're already doing well. A lot of talks today have heard the concept of ROI come up. We're going to invest in this new experience. We're going to invest in this new space. What's the ROI on that? Well, I would ask you, what's the ROI on a lot of the training you're doing? Are we measuring that? How are we measuring it? And before we can ever answer that question, we have to know how many minutes of training time we do. So one of the things we look at when we work with companies, we look at exactly how many minutes of training time occur in a classroom, how much minutes of training time happen on e-learning, how many minutes of training time happen in a live role-playing situation, and we'll evaluate the lift based off employee. And you know what we'll do? We'll make better decisions on what we invest in year over year. Imagine being able to get to the point where you know exactly 36 hours of training is required to turn a new hire seller into a high-performing seller. Or if you have a mid-level seller, how many additional types of training hours are required to lift? And that whole ROI starts with us thinking about how do we build our own training calendar. If you are hiring trainers, and we work with a lot of trainers, if you are looking to hire trainers, I would give you one main point. I think there's one thing that a lot of teams do wrong when they do hire a trainer. I think that knowing that they're coming into your house, the best use of your spend if you're bringing in an outside firm is requiring a on-site call to ensure that the trainer that's coming into your organization is using your jargon, they're using your talking points, they're speaking your language, and they make sure that the deck that they've delivered to a lot of different organizations is customized to your brand, even if it's just look and feel and images. I believe that is so important when an outside person comes into your organization and tries to make your people better. The second part is requiring a post conversation. I think that I would never hire a trainer and I wouldn't require at least 30 days of follow-up to make sure that after they leave, they're providing us with material and ongoing content, or maybe ongoing webinars or touch points to make sure that the stuff that we delivered that we know is probably going to be forgotten just because of the fact that there's a lot of stuff going on is brought back into the organization. Something really simple. We have 2 more. Number 4, training being too easy. I think today training is too easy. I mean, all you have to do is make sure you don't fall asleep in a seminar, and you've survived training. We work with a lot of financial service companies now back in the States who are getting all types of class action lawsuits because of all types of different topics around harassment, service training, sales interactions, because they consider training just something that we deliver, and then they make you sign and check the box that you received the manual, and that's training. Again, training today has been seen as something that happens at you. How do we make training something that we can engage? When I get on a flight today to go back to the States, I would not get on the plane if the fighter pilot just read the manual. I would require them to go through how many hours of simulation. You would never put a player on the pitch if they haven't gone through how many hours of practice time. So when I think about back to our workforce, what's your flight simulator? What are you using in order to accelerate that gap of training time we talked about? If there's a gap of 4,000 hours, how are you going to make up the 4,000 hours? And I would argue that just the manual or just the video is probably not enough. Role-playing is a very, very powerful. I know everybody in here probably uses role-playing for sales and service experiences. More than ever, it is one of the most critical exercises. And while there's a lot of people that have I don't know how this joke will go over, but there's a lot of people we talk about have post-traumatic stress disorder from a role play that went bad before. Okay? They sat in a situation and it was not delivered the right way, so they never want to role play. But the reality is, unless you want your people role playing on your customers, you have to do those things. So we got to make that practice better. I think that's one of the things in the next 10 years, virtual reality, not today, maybe 10, 15, will be something that can help us with for training. Because Siri still can't get me to the airport. So, we got a lot of work to do on some of our technology to make that impactful. But Dan Coyle, The Talent Code, really powerful book, has a really great story actually on Pele and the history of futsal in this book. And he talks about how futsal created a really tight struggle zone, which is obvious if you understand the game, where you obviously you have more touches, which equate into a faster way to ramp up. I use that point a lot when we talk to organizations, where we talk about how are we going to safely upskill faster. His one point is, in regards to developing any skill, struggle is not an option. It is a biological requirement to development. If it's too easy, we forget it. So that's why with a lot of companies we work with, we'll test people on content before they've ever seen it. And we'll get HR managers that will raise their hand and say, that's not the right order. We'll say it is. And they'll say, well, we're really concerned because, if they take the test and know the answers, they're not going to be motivated. Like, well, they are if you explain it to them along the way. They are if you maybe try to make it more exciting than just making it an academic test. We talk a lot about, if we think about our employees today who are coming out of universities with pretty significant amount of loan debt, depending on where you are, the last thing they want to do when they get hired by you is be handed a test after taking tests for the last 14 years of their life. Again, we're in sports. We have a huge opportunity to rebrand these things and really think about it if we just spend time doing it. When we talk about struggle, there's 3 key points. I don't want to get into the weeds, but the way you make struggle happen, we talk about testing people on it. 3 things have to happen. One is you have to vary training content. So if I had a training manual with 10 chapters in it, I would test you on chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 10 during week 1. Like chapter 10 doesn't make any sense. I haven't seen it yet. It's okay. In week 2, I'll test you on chapter 2, chapter 1, and chapter 7. In week 3, I'll test you on chapter 1, chapter 3, and chapter 10 again. So again, if you use, anybody here think about sports analogies, practice that is unplanned, if you talk to, again, any coach, strength coach, results in the best long-term impact. Keeping players on their toes and not being able to forecast what's happening is a really powerful part of this mechanic. If you read the talent code, you'll learn what the other 2 are, but variation is something everybody here can do. This is a quick example of a forgetting curve when we talk about struggle. This was a case study we did with 10 sports teams in the States. The first group sat through an online learning module or a sales trainer on day 1. We tested them at day 3, day 7, and day 30 to see how much material in the training they forgot. You could see the drastic fall off. We turned their manual that they learned into a game with multiple choice quizzes. Anybody here that's familiar with popular games from Candy Crush to Trivia Crack to HQ, just followed the same format with them. This second group didn't sit through the training. They just played the game once a day. Now obviously they struggled at the first few days because they were just guessing through everything. But you see lift that starts to happen by day 7, day 15, and day 30. So the cool thing for me was using games, wasn't just the lift initially. This is obviously pretty interesting. But the fall off that happens after, that long-term fall off being much flatter, is something we have to think about. How do we, with the same intensity we try to make our marketing sticky, how do we make our product knowledge training, our service standards, our sales training skills sticky for our people? My last point, we're going to open up for questions. Aversion to adopting new technology is number 5. Failing to adopt new technology that we can use as part of our process. Only 1% of global training today happens on a mobile device. That's crazy to me. There's a big movement where we talk about bringing your own device, BYOD, where everything I should be able to be trained on should be able to be in my hand when I want it, where I want it. But depending on where you are globally with labor laws and different types of rules, we restrict the ability for employees to be able to access the training they want wherever they want it. This is something that's going to change consistently. There's another great book by Gregory Burns called Iconoclast. It spends a lot of time talking about things like competition and gamification. The brain is lazy. It changes only when it has to. And the conditions that force the brain to rewire itself are when it confronts something novel. Novelty equals learning, and learning means physical rewiring of the brain. If as employees we know the same thing happens every day, I mean, sometimes you just have to change everybody's desks up, right? Just to see things from a new perspective. And I think that as you look at the way that you're upskilling your workforce, trying to weave some of these types of concepts, technology provides tremendous opportunity today. Whether you're using video technology to video those role plays, to make your team watch it over again. Again, teams break down film all the time. I'll break down this because I want to get better. Are your people looking at things and using technology to do stuff like that? And there's a tremendous amount of tools, some that you don't even have to invest in, some that you can create internally, again, if you are committed to it. I'm going to open for questions here with a few minutes, but I want to make one point. Thank you for your time. Everybody in this room, I opened up by talking about people. The people that you impact every day. We talk a lot about jobs and workforce. The jobs that people wake up to do every day, if they're properly trained well, produce employees, if they are trained well and prepared and happy about their work, that are better fathers, better mothers, better husbands, better wives, more likely to give back to the community. Research shows less likely to be incarcerated if you have a job that you wake up for every day and you feel empowered and a part of a team. And especially in sports, that team part is something that we should all strive for. So with so many people that you all impact every day, keep doing it. And anything we can be to be a resource for you, we're here to help. Thank you for your time. One last point as you all leave. 1Huddle, mindless plug. We do gamify employee training, especially for sales and service teams. I built, because I told you you're going to forget a lot of what I said today. And I didn't see a lot of, I saw some note taking, again, on mobile devices, interestingly enough. We built a game out of this session. So if you're at the airport later, or if you're on your way back home and you would like to try out a game to reinforce this training, you can. If you go to play.1huddle.co/ALSD, you can throw your email in, and Roger, who's on our team in the back of the room, will make sure our game design team gets you access to play a game totally around this topic. There's some points I made and some points I didn't, but something hopefully that you can take away some of the things that we're sharing today to bring back to your team, your company, your brand, and help out your people. Sound good? Great. Thank you, everybody.